My name is Aurelia Hayes, 38 years old. The first thing that reached me was the laughter, lacquered and weightless, the kind that rings off cut crystal and never touches a rib cage. It slid across the marble of the Hamilton Grand's ballroom and curled beneath the chandelier where my father stood with a congressman and 3 donors who wore their name tags like medals. The quartet painted a polite gloss over everything. Perfume, polish, posture. I waited in the spill of the doorway with the escort team, clipboard tucked to my side, sword at my hip, catching points of light that skittered across the brass guard like minnows. He said it once, then again, louder, riding the room's current as if he owned the tide. At least the army pays her rent. The congressman chuckled on cue. A banker nodded as if he'd just heard something wise. Somewhere to my left, a handler whispered, "Press pool is circling," and the violinist's bow faltered for half a heartbeat before remembering its job. My jaw didn't move. My heart didn't either. Stillness is a uniform of its own. The general I'd been assigned to escort pivoted slightly. He'd heard the line, "Men like him miss nothing." He saw me in profile, then looked to the cluster under the chandelier and back. A small crease landed between his eyes. "That your father?" he asked, not unkindly. The title on the evening's gold-edged program said, "Richard Hayes Development Group, presenting sponsor." The subtext needed no ink. "It's Mr. Hayes," I answered, level. He studied me for the barest second, rank polished on my shoulders, the steadiness they expect when cameras loom, and gave a single short nod a soldier understands. "Understood, General," he said to me deliberately, as if to relocate my name to the air where it belonged. We moved when the cue came, crisp and inevitable. I stepped onto marble. Sound shifted. Heels met the floor with the tidy metronome of a procession. The room's temperature seemed to drop a degree. The lights trimmed themselves to the stage, and the stage trimmed itself to the flag. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's ribboned voice murmured, "please welcome Major General Aurelia Hayes, United States Army." Polite applause at first, then a hush that had a different weight once my surname found the ears beneath the chandelier. My father turned. For a second his face emptied, like a stage shorn of its set. Then a tremor ran through the wineglass in his hand, and a red crescent bled across his cuff. The general's palm met mine. We saluted. "Welcome, General," he said in a tone I was suddenly grateful for. No extra volume, no theatrics, just recognition measured to fit the truth. He looked from me to the man beneath the chandelier and asked, almost conversationally, "That's your daughter?" The question slipped into the space where pose used to be and found something tender. My father opened his mouth. The room waited. "Yes," he managed. Barely air, almost apology. "Not yet." I turned my gaze to the far flag and lifted my hand. The salute I held was as precise as every one I'd given across 2 decades on dust and tarmac. Not for him. For the promise stitched into that field of blue. For the girl with a duffel bag who once believed silence was what love looked like. I felt the whole ballroom learning what silence actually does, when it's honest. It rearranges the furniture of a life. The color guard posted. The quartet tucked their bows. I took the podium for a short address we'd rehearsed until it fit into the seams of a formal night like a second lining. "Service," I said, steady, "is less about the size of a paycheck than the size of your presence when no one is looking. It's the grit to wake before dawn, to keep promises in places where the cameras don't go. It's humility that remembers names, and the strength to act without applause." No one clapped at first. Good. Understanding always arrives slower than noise. Then the room found its hands, quiet, clear, respectful. I let the sound wash across my boots and stop there. He was still watching me. I could feel it the way you feel weather change before the clouds understand they're moving. Pride is a script. Recognition is not. He looked small for the first time, not diminished, human. A PR aide leaned in to murmur something that started with "donor photo op" and died against his shoulder. He didn't react. He was busy doing the arithmetic that comes when the story you've sold yourself collides with the proof in front of you. After the ceremony portions, the choreography resumed. Servers gliding, napkins snapping open like flags of truce, chairs turned at neat angles for maximum camera-friendly candor. I stepped off the dais and moved toward the edge of the room, where sightlines thin, the place I always choose when there's more to see than to say. The general paused long enough to squeeze my shoulder. "Stood tall," he said simply. It landed exactly where it needed to, no deeper, no shallower. A reporter with a bob and a booklight on her phone tracked me from across the parquet, quick eyes doing their math. She looked down at the program again, tracing the Hayes, like she was making sure she hadn't misread the letters. Then she raised her lens. I didn't pose. Let them take what exists. I became aware of the Hamilton Grand as a machine, how the lighting designer warmed the whites to flatter skin at table 41, how the band leader watched the crowd's mood like surf, how the MC kept one finger on the pulse of the donor's patience. I've been in operations my whole adult life. Logistics is just choreography with consequences. The difference tonight was that the consequences were intimate. General Hayes, an usher, stood at a courteous distance, cream envelope in gloved hand, initials in black ink pressed into the flap. A.H. My first thought should have been, how quaint. It was not. It was 12 years old and smelled like coffee and my mother's handwriting. I took the envelope and felt the thinnest tremor in my own fingers. Irritation at the tremor, then discipline, smoothing it down with the rest of me. Before I broke the seal, a shadow eased into my peripheral. He had slipped away from donors, handlers, the circle where applause gathers like low-pressure air. No cameras in this pocket of hallway. No chandeliers to make anyone glitter. Just the corridor's cooler light and the faint pulse of bass through double doors. "Aurelia," he said. Not General, not Honey. Just my name, as if he'd discovered it again and was testing whether it would hold. His hair was perfect. The line of his jaw, still the line in my brother's face. His hands, the hands that signed checks and contracts and shut doors, were perfectly still because he knew the first motion would betray them. "You look different," he added, faintly astonished, as if uniform could change a person more than the years of choosing to wear it. I kept my posture loose. Attention without tension. "I am," I said. He tried again and reached, not for my arm or the envelope, but for a sentence that could bridge a life. "About what I said," he began. "Save it," I cut in gently. "Hallways aren't where truth lives. Tomorrow. Coffee. No cameras." He blinked, and pride, that old tyrant, lay down enough to let something else breathe. "Where?" he asked, voice careful. "The VA," I said, "if you want to see what gratitude looks like when it isn't for sale." His throat worked around a word he didn't give me. He nodded once. A man who has spent a career buying his way through doors suddenly asked to earn entry by showing up. "Noon," he murmured, and retreated. The way a man retreats when the path forward is the only one that doesn't humiliate him. A server swept past with a tray of sugared figs. The quartet found a brighter tune. A donor slung an arm around a senator's shoulder and laughed like relief. I let the room blur. The envelope waited in my hand, paper warm from touch. I slipped a finger under the seal and lifted. Inside, no note. A torn photograph instead. Me at 18 in a recruit's uniform, cheeks still soft with girlhood, chin stubborn enough to be mistaken for impudence. The tear ran clean through my smile. Behind the photo, a single sheet, cream-ruled, with my father's handwriting moving along it carefully, as if he'd been afraid to press too hard. The letter didn't reach the bottom. It ended mid-sentence. Ink stopped like breath. "If you ever read this, it's because I finally learned the difference between building houses and..." And nothing. The rest had been torn away. I stared at the torn edge, neat as paperwork, jagged as memory, and felt the old ache shift in my chest to make room for something I didn't yet have a name for. Not forgiveness, not exactly. More like a hinge whining as it begins to move after too many years of paint. The reporter across the room lowered her phone, eyes narrow with questions I wasn't going to answer yet. The general chatted with a donor by the bar, his back turned in a way that gave me cover while pretending not to. I slid the photograph back into the envelope with the half letter and weighed both in my palm. There it was, a history of rooms, kitchens and ballrooms and barracks, where I had learned to breathe through noise until silence told the truth. My father had finally seen me, but the math was unfinished. Tomorrow would show whether he wanted to learn it. I tucked the envelope beneath the clipboard, squared my shoulders, and stepped back into the machine of the night, letting it run around me like weather. The sword at my side tapped once against my thigh, the light quick and silver as a second thought. I didn't look back to the chandelier. I didn't need to. A room that has learned how to go quiet once doesn't forget. The band swelled, the donors smiled, the flag held its corner against the conditioned air. I exhaled, slow and exact, and felt the door inside me swing, just a little, toward morning. I didn't open the rest of the envelope until the hotel emptied and the city's noise thinned to the soft rattle of HVAC through the Hamilton Grand's bones. In my room, I set the sword in its case like a sleeping animal and sat on the edge of the bed with the torn photo face down on my knee. The letter's unfinished sentence breathed like a paper cut. If you ever read this, it's because I finally learned the difference between building houses and... My thumb traced the rip as if I could read through absence. I left the lamp on low and reached for what the letter could not hold, the first kitchen where I learned how to stand. The morning I told him was pale and serviceable, a Fairfax winter that hadn't committed yet. White columns out front, a flag that seldom moved, every line of the house insisting on prosperity like a mantra. My father poured coffee with the same focus he signed contracts, wrists steady, steam rising in disciplined spirals. College first, he said, as if continuing a conversation we'd never started. Internship after sophomore year. You'll have an office before you have a degree. Real estate, Aurelia. That's how you build something real. The brochure on the counter said Georgetown in dark blue letters. The pamphlet in my hand said, United States Army, in a shade of resolve no printer could calibrate. I already signed, I said. Not loud, not apologetic. The cup paused halfway to its saucer. Porcelain kissed porcelain with a click. Signed. Yes, sir. Enlisted. Sir, because it kept my voice in its lane, not because he'd earned it. He laughed the laugh he kept for people who didn't understand how the world worked. It had the flat sound of a door closing from the wrong side. You're joking, he said, and when I didn't joke back, the laugh fell through the floor and left disbelief standing in its socks. We passed through the stations, fury, bargaining, threat, like a pair of travelers speed-walking a terminal to a gate they never should have booked. You have a full ride, he said. You're throwing it away to polish boots? To serve, I said. He shook his head, not in refusal, but in a refusal to imagine a world where refusal mattered less than choice. You want to play soldier? Fine. Don't expect me to bankroll it. I'm not asking you to. He didn't slam a door. He simply stepped out of the kitchen and took the house with him. My mother found me later with a hand on my shoulder and a folded photograph of all of us from a spring none of us had earned. He doesn't mean it, she whispered. He just doesn't understand people who serve for reasons he can't count. She pressed the photo into my palm like contraband and walked away before he could see her give me anything he hadn't approved. I left at dawn the next week. The bus station smelled like coffee, bleach, and starting over. He didn't come. She brought a paper bag with 2 oranges and a note written in looping, careful letters. I love you. He left the room when we saw your recruiter's card. He left the room would be our family's way of saying what he wouldn't. Shame, fear, the kind of pride that can't metabolize a daughter's spine. When the driver called Fort Benning next stop, I felt something unclasp under my ribs. The seat was thin. The air was thinner. Freedom doesn't bother with upholstery. Basic stripped us into our parts and built us back on fewer lies. Mornings were a roar and a whisper, the bark of orders, riding the hush of cold. I learned the exact angle at which to carry weight so your shoulders don't remember later. I learned the taste of iron that comes before the second mile breaks. No one asked who my father was. No one cared. Leadership was not a speech, but a body that kept moving when everyone else wanted to stop. In the low crawl under barbed wire, a girl beside me froze. She was 19 and had grown up in a place where the ground stayed clean. Eyes up, I said, grabbing her sleeve. Breathe on the count. We counted the earth together. After lights out, I wrote letters home, mostly to my mother, sometimes to the empty space at the table. She wrote back on stationery that smelled faintly of her hand cream. He watched the segment, she'd say later. He didn't say anything. He left the room. Silence is a language. It isn't neutral. Kandahar arrived, as heat you can fold, dust that turns your tongue into a map, a horizon that promises it will meet you halfway and never does. Logistics is a lifeline that refuses applause. We ran supply routes under skies that forgot to blink. Halfway through a routine check, the radio cracked with a warning nobody wanted to believe. Too quiet. The second vehicle went up in a white that had edges. Sound became a wall. When it thinned, I heard man down, and my own pulse knocking. Martinez bled through his pants leg, color leaving his face like it had someplace better to be. Tourniquet, pressure, breathe. Collins, 19, Nebraska. A laugh too big for desert. Broke position on instinct because instincts don't read orders when friends yell. Private, hold! The ground answered with another blast. When I reached him, his eyes were still open and foolishly vast. You'll be fine, I told him, because you have to speak a future to keep the present from swallowing you. He tried to smile and said, Guess I'll miss that pie, and then breathed in a way that didn't ask for another. I carried him to the bird myself. Dust stuck to everything that mattered. In the report, the verbs were clean. In the letter to his mother, I stuck to the kind that don't lie on their faces. Brave, steady, loved. I didn't write that I'd told him he'd be fine. You don't put that in a letter a kitchen will absorb for the rest of its life. The investigation concluded we'd done what we could with the timeline we had. Lives are always slightly longer in reports than they are on the ground. There was another incident a year later, the kind that seals under classification and presses its shape into your choices. I made a call that deviated by an inch from protocol to keep a promise I'd made 30 hours earlier in a hangar that smelled like hydraulic fluid and old coffee. We got our people out. The memo was unsatisfying and accurate. I slept 2 hours in 36 and woke already moving. Some debts you pay in motion. Years stack differently when each one uses you like a tool. Captain, major, colonel, titles that felt less like promotions and more like the Army saying, we believe you'll still show up. At some point, the letters to my mother became phone calls where we talked about flowers and recipes and never said the thing we both knew, that a man can love a daughter in a language he refuses to learn. News from home arrived as clippings. Ethan standing next to our father with a ribboned shovel in a photograph where both of them had chosen the same expression. A different clipping, quieter, hinted at a development that stalled and then did not, as if money could be persuaded by rhetoric. I stopped scouring the business pages. My job was to keep people breathing. The rest could argue about square footage. When the second star came, the ceremony was small and correct. Pins, acknowledgments, hands I trusted. My mother called afterward and said he watched. He turned off the TV. He left the room. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It landed like data you file because it's part of a pattern, and patterns help you drive. By the time orders put me back in D.C., the city felt like a stage that had mistaken itself for a courthouse. Uniforms draw attention, but attention isn't the same as respect. I carried both stars without needing them to tell me who I was. At night, the Hamilton Grand's chandelier flickered in my mind before I had ever stood under it. That's how inevitability works. Somewhere between briefings, an old acquaintance from the wrong parties told me I must be so proud to still be doing that. And I felt the soft bruise of a certain kind of condescension that prefers its soldiers silent and photogenic. I typed his name into a browser and found a press release. Patriot Builders Outreach Partners with Hayes Development to support veteran housing. The page had the texture of a brochure. The numbers looked good until you asked them a question. I turned the envelope over again and slid the torn photo into the light. Me at 18, the chin my father called obstinate when he meant independent. Behind the photo, the paper rasped. A second slip had nested there, thin as a secret. I eased it free. Not stationary. A photocopy of a ledger line, the kind printed on forms that are meant to look official even when they are not. Patriot Builders Outreach. Consulting. E. Hayes. Auth. R. Hayes. A block stamp of my father's signature, square and obedient, the ink slightly blurred as if the stamp had been cleaned with impatience. In the corner, the initials RHDG. a Lupin Bar logo I recognized from billboards that sold Skyline to people who like to buy view and call it vision. Ink can be forged. Stamps can travel desks they weren't earned to cross. But the line items bled into each other with the certainty of a habit, not a mistake. I sat very still while the lamplight warmed the paper, as if warmth could make numbers honest. How long had this been happening? How much money had walked from one pocket to another, while a benefactor's speech praised sacrifice? If I brought this into daylight, the housing pipeline might collapse long enough to drown people who could not swim another yard. If I stayed silent, Ethan would keep siphoning, and the only thing I'd built would be complicity. On the lower margin, a handwritten note in pen I recognized from check memos and birthday cards with amounts. His. Review before audit. The R is sharp, the D closed like a door. It didn't say who should review. It didn't say when. It didn't say whether the man under the chandelier was a thief or a coward or both. It only said there was a moment before an audit where a person could decide who they were going to be. I tucked the ledger copy back beneath the half letter and slid both under the photo. In the hallway beyond my door, a guest laughed the way people laugh when their lives are lit well enough to ignore their shadows. I lay back on the bed without undressing, boots on the carpet, eyes on the ceiling's crown molding, as if it could hold the phone call I would not make tonight. Morning would bring coffee at the VA, fluorescent lights that make suits look like costumes, and men and women who had learned the grammar of gratitude without a single microphone. It would also bring a choice with edges. I clicked off the lamp and let the room go dark in stages. Service, I reminded myself, isn't a speech. It's a ledger no one else sees, kept in a handwriting only you can read. In the quiet, the torn sentence in my father's letter hovered like a bridge drawn halfway. If you ever read this, it's because I finally learned the difference between building houses and... I closed my eyes on the rip and let the rest write itself in the dark. I woke before the city did, the envelope still on the table beside the coffee mug I hadn't finished. The ledger copy had shifted overnight, curling at the corners as though it wanted to be smaller. I stared at the names and the stamp, E. Hayes, R. Hayes, and thought about all the other names I'd signed in triplicate to keep convoys moving, meals rationed, lights burning. Paperwork can save lives or erase them, depending on who holds the pen. By the time sunlight threaded through the blinds, I had my uniform pressed, ribbon straight, expression neutral. There were meetings to attend, reports to file, and a public image to maintain. The Army had taught me composure. Washington required performance. A week after the gala, the headlines arrived. Patriot Builders to expand veteran housing initiative. Photo front and center. My father shaking hands with a senator. The caption, Developer Richard Hayes partners with Army leadership to deliver affordable housing for heroes. Leadership, meaning me. I hadn't agreed to anything. The photographer had simply caught the moment when the general and I stood near the podium. The framing did the rest. I read the article twice, each line more surreal. They had quoted a representative from command thanking corporate sponsors for their generosity. No name attached, no statement verified. I could almost hear Ethan dictating it, smoothing the narrative like lacquer. My father would have approved the draft, proud of the symmetry, his company and his daughter finally in the same paragraph. Optics, perfect and poisonous. At headquarters that afternoon, my aide knocked softly. Ma'am, reporters keep calling. They say you're collaborating with Hayes Development on outreach. Should I... Tell them I'm collaborating with the Department of Defense, I said. Everything else is speculation. He nodded, grateful for brevity, and left me with the silence of consequence. When the office emptied at dusk, I opened my laptop. Search results lined up like soldiers on review. Every press release carried the same logo, Patriot Builders Outreach, RHDG Consulting Division. The numbers buried in fine print told a different story. Donations moving through shell nonprofits, funds reallocated for administrative costs. All technically legal, all ethically bankrupt. A knock on the open door broke my focus. You still allergic to daylight? The voice was familiar, too casual for protocol. Captain Sloan, my logistics deputy, leaned against the frame, coffee in hand. Some people jog, I said. I read fraud reports. He grinned. Same calorie burn, worse mood. I liked Sloan because he'd seen enough desserts not to be impressed by marble. I turned the screen toward him. You ever heard of Patriot Builders Outreach? He squinted. Yeah, they're the ones sponsoring that construction scholarship at West Point. Good PR. He paused, reading closer. You think it's dirty? I think it's dressed too nicely to be clean. He set his cup down. Want me to run a background? No, I said. Not yet. Just if anything crosses your desk with their name, flag it. He nodded, understanding that not yet often means I need proof, not suspicion. When he left, I leaned back and stared at the ceiling grid. The fluorescent hum sounded like the whine of a drone, constant, mechanical, necessary. 2 days later, I received an invitation, embossed, heavy stock, from the same PR firm that managed my father's events. Honoring civilian partners in veteran service, it read. I didn't bother to RSVP. Attendance was assumed. Reputation, after all, is a family inheritance even when affection is not. The banquet hall this time was smaller, hung with banners instead of chandeliers, but the choreography was identical. I stood near the back, hands clasped, while speakers praised visionary developers and the heroes who inspire them. My father took the stage midway through, voice confident, phrasing polished. I've always believed success means giving back, he said, and tonight I'm proud to announce new housing initiatives for returning service members. The crowd clapped on schedule. Cameras flashed. Then he glanced toward me, just once, and said, none of this would be possible without the dedication of those who serve, including my own daughter, Major General Aurelia Hayes. Applause swelled. I forced a professional smile and inclined my head. He looked relieved, as though approval could still be bartered. When the MC resumed, I slipped out a side door into the corridor where the air tasted less ornamental. Footsteps followed. You didn't stay for dessert, he said. I lost my appetite around the word visionary. He sighed. You always had a sharp tongue. Only when cornered. He hesitated, studying my uniform. I didn't mean to embarrass you. You meant to own the room, I said. You succeeded. His expression flickered, a moment of something almost raw. Do you think I don't know how far you've come? I think you measure distance in headlines. We stood there, two versions of the same stubborn gene. He broke first, reaching into his pocket. I've been sorting through old files. Ethan handles most of the paperwork now, maybe too much. He handed me a folded page, another ledger photocopy, fresh ink across the bottom. Review pending external audit. The signature looked authentic. The ink felt defensive. I didn't sign those disbursements, he said quietly. Ethan uses a stamp when I'm traveling. I should have checked. I thought it was routine. Routine theft? I didn't say that. No, I said, but you thought it. He met my eyes, the same color as mine, dulled by years of boardrooms and self-defense. Aurelia, if this goes public, everything collapses. The housing projects, the scholarships, the pipeline for veterans who actually need roofs, I finished. Yes. Then maybe collapse isn't the worst thing. Maybe it's the only honest thing left. He exhaled like a man tasting humility for the first time. You sound just like your mother when she's right. She usually is. I turned to go, but he stopped me with a single question that landed heavier than he intended. Do you still think I'm the enemy? I paused in the doorway. I think you're what happens when pride forgets to pray. Then I left him alone with his photocopies. Outside, rain started, sharp, relentless, drumming on the pavement like boot cadence. I tilted my face toward it and let it wash the static from my thoughts. The city lights blurred, the world smelled briefly of honesty. Back in my apartment, I pinned the two ledger copies side by side on the corkboard above my desk. One had his initials, the other his stamp. Between them was the gap where truth usually hides. Before sleep, I opened my email. A reporter's subject line blinked at the top. Inquiry. Allegations of misused veteran funds. Patriot Builders. Hayes Development. Beneath it, a single sentence, previewed in gray. We'd like to confirm your involvement or comment before publication. I didn't answer. I just stared at the cursor pulsing like a heartbeat and whispered the phrase that had carried me through deserts and dinner parties alike. Hold the line. Tomorrow would ask for decisions. Tonight, I allowed myself one unmeasured breath, the kind that doesn't have to sound strong to be true. The morning after the rain, the city steamed. Pavement hissed under tires, and the Hamilton Grand stood like a washed chalice, its marble too clean, its light too deliberate. I hadn't planned on walking back inside that building so soon, but command requested a follow-up with the general who'd hosted the gala. PR coordination, they called it. Optics again. By noon, I was back under the chandeliers that had witnessed my father's undoing, clipboard in hand. Professionalism draped like armor. The staff moved in silent recovery. Florists pruning wilted centerpieces, electricians disassembling the stage. The ballroom felt smaller without applause. Maybe truth takes up more space than lies. Near the podium, the PR coordinator, sleek suit, smile like static, waved at me. General Hayes, we're gathering testimonials from last night's honorees. Just a quick statement on community partnerships. I'm not authorized for comment, I said, protocol. He blinked, disappointed that protocol couldn't be charmed. Perhaps your father could provide... He doesn't speak for the military, I said, and moved on. The clipboard helped. People respect props that suggest purpose. In the corner, a janitor hummed an old hymn as he polished the floor. The words, half heard, half felt, were about mercy. It sounded like the only honest song the room had ever heard. I wanted to stay and listen, but footsteps and perfume announced a different rhythm. Reporters. The woman with the bob, same one who had caught my photo mid-salute, was back. She saw me instantly and smiled the way hunters smile at tracks. General Hayes, she said, recorder already in hand. Your father's organization lists you as a strategic advisor for Patriot Builders Outreach. Can you confirm? I held her gaze. If my name is on that list, it's without my consent. Her eyebrow lifted. That's a strong denial. It's a factual one. She studied me, maybe wondering if deflection counted as guilt. Then perhaps you'd like to comment on the financial investigation? What investigation? She smiled, as if we were co-conspirators in curiosity. The Department of Urban Development's audit into charitable housing grants. Several filings trace back to Hayes Development Group. I didn't blink. You'll have to ask them. Already did, she said. No response yet. When she left, her heels echoed through the hall like punctuation marks on a sentence I wasn't done writing. By the service elevator, I saw him, my father, talking to a man in a charcoal suit whose badge identified him as legal counsel. Their conversation was low, quick, anxious. My father's shoulders, once the architecture of confidence, sagged as if the foundation had shifted. He looked older than he had any right to. For the first time, pity tried to surface, but pride still had seniority. I stepped into view. Morning, Richard? The lawyer stiffened. My father turned. Aurelia, you're early. So are subpoenas, I said. He waved the lawyer away. Can we not do this here? Then where? You avoided the hallway yesterday, the phone for 20 years. How far do you want me to chase your conscience? He exhaled, a tremor running through it. You always turn everything into a battlefield. Only when someone's hiding behind civilians. He rubbed his eyes, voice dropping. I didn't sign those transfers. Then who did? He hesitated. Ethan oversees the outreach division. The paperwork goes through him first. Convenient. Aurelia, I trusted my son. So did I said quietly. You raised him. He winced. Please, just meet with me tonight. No staff, no accusations. Let me explain. You want absolution, that's not my department. I want understanding. Understanding. The word had dressed itself as humility, but I could hear the old demand underneath it. Give me back control. Fine, I said. No cameras. 1 hour. Coffee shop near the VA. You remember where it is? His mouth twitched. Of course. Good. Try showing up this time. I walked away before he could find a reply. Outside, the air smelled like overripe magnolia and diesel. My phone buzzed. A message from Captain Sloan. Audit team requesting your statement. Should I stall? I typed back. For now. Back at HQ, the general was waiting in the briefing room. You stirred the hornet's nest, Hayes, he said without heat. Press is sniffing around those housing contracts. Sir, my only involvement was standing near the wrong people at the wrong time. He studied me. Maybe so. But perception outranks fact in this town. You might want to prepare a written account, just in case. Yes, sir. When he left, I stayed in the empty room, listening to the air vents whistle. Perception outranks fact. My father had built an empire on that principle. Now it was turning on him. That evening, the coffee shop near the VA was half empty, its fluorescent lights flattening everyone into honesty. He was already there, in a suit too tailored for the setting, stirring sugar into a cup he wouldn't drink. He looked up when I entered and stood, uncertain of the protocol between guilt and love. You came, he said. I said I would. He gestured to the seat across from him. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, it's not on the menu. A ghost of a smile. You always did have your mother's humor. Silence thickened, but not the hostile kind, the tired kind. Ethan's been handling the charitable accounts, he began. He convinced me to streamline approvals, said it would cut red tape. I signed off on the process, not the transactions. But if the audit finds misuse, it all traces back to me. And to the people your PR machine claims to help, I said. He nodded slowly. I know. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Behind him, a group of veterans in wheelchairs traded jokes with a nurse. Laughter echoed across linoleum. My father glanced toward them, eyes damp. I never understood until last night, he said. Watching them stand for you, well, most of them couldn't stand, but they tried. I realized what I'd missed. Honor isn't architecture. It never was. He reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside were signed statements, receipts, and the beginnings of an apology written on company letterhead. If the audit becomes public, I'll cooperate fully. I just don't want Ethan dragged unless he's responsible, I finished. You can't protect him by lying again. He covered his face with his hands. For a second, he wasn't the mogul or the patriarch, just a man who'd finally run out of disguises. When he looked up, his voice was almost a whisper. Do you still hate me? I thought about Collins's mother, about my own, about all the people who kept loving someone long after it stopped being deserved. No, I said. Hate takes too much maintenance. He exhaled, maybe relief, maybe grief. Then maybe there's hope. Hope, I said, is earned hourly. We left together, but not side by side. He lingered at the door, raincoat over his arm, expression raw in the streetlight. Tomorrow, he said. I'll come with you. The VA. No cameras. I'll believe it when I see it. He nodded, accepting the challenge like a man signing terms of surrender. The night folded around us, wet, humming, fragile. As I watched him walk away, the reflection of streetlights rippled across a puddle at my feet, turning the world upside down. Father blurred, daughter clear, both of us still moving toward the same uncertain dawn. The VA never tries to be beautiful. That's why I trust it. Fluorescent lights that flatten pretense, linoleum that tells the truth about shoes, a cafe line that smells like burnt coffee and courage. I was there at 11:50, uniform under a plain coat, sleeves rolled once to look less ceremonial. A volunteer pinned a paper badge to my lapel, visitor, even though half the staff knew my name. Labels are for the building. The people already know who shows up. He arrived at 11:58, breath white in the December air, tie a half-inch off-center the way pride slips when it's tired. For a second, he hovered at the threshold like he was asking the room for permission. The security guard nodded him through with the same bored grace given to senators and sons. My father caught my eye and lifted his hand. Not a wave exactly, more like a question mark. I answered with a nod. No ceremony, no stage. Coffee first, I said. We slid into the cafeteria line. A nurse with a day-old bun and a month-old sense of humor grinned at me. General, she said, you bringing new recruits? Something like that, I said. This one doesn't salute yet. My father flushed and held up his palms in surrender. Just tell me where to stand. Behind the pot, the nurse said, already moving. Pour to the line. No speeches. He took the stainless carafe with two hands, as if it might judge him. The first pour sloshed over the lip, a small brown tide pooling on the tray. A veteran in a wheelchair rolled up and steadied the carafe with one deft knuckle. Easy, Rich, he said, reading the name on the visitor sticker. Coffee's a patient, not a lawsuit. Laughter cracked the air. Quick. Generous. My father laughed too, and for once it sounded unrehearsed, a sound that forgot to check the mirror. He wiped the spill with a napkin like a man mopping his own arrogance. I clipped a second badge to his jacket, volunteer, and the pin trembled against the fabric before finding purchase. He caught it with 2 fingers. Feels heavier than it looks, he murmured. They all do, I said. For an hour he poured in measured arcs while I ferried cups to tables. He asked names and listened as if the room might revoke his access if he didn't. A double amputee showed him how to angle the carafe so foam didn't cheat the fill line. A woman with a scar bright as a seam across her forehead told him the joke about military intelligence he'd heard at fundraisers, but this time it landed differently because she owned it. He said thank you more than once and winced only at his own reflex to apologize for the wrong things. Between refills, I watched his face change in increments too small for a camera. Disguise and defense sloughed off until what was left looked suspiciously like a man. It would have been easier to hate him. Hate has clean edges. This was messier, a softening that threatened to take me with it. At 12:45, I took him down the corridor where laughter travels differently and the air smells like antiseptic and lemon. A rec room. Television reruns with the volume too high. A bulletin board crowded with photos of anniversaries, fish caught, babies held. He moved among them without the choreography of a donor. I watched him ask a nurse whether he should move a chair to make space for a wheelchair and then move it without waiting for permission. The nurse nodded once, the rare blessing of staff, approval unmarred by flattery. We ended up at a round table with a view of the courtyard where the flag refused to pretend there was no wind. He folded his hands around a paper cup he didn't drink from. "You were right," he said quietly. "I didn't understand what service meant." "The dictionary was available," I said, because sarcasm is easier than grief. He took it. "I didn't look it up." Silence settled, not hostile, not shy, like a bench that has finally remembered it's for resting. He reached into his briefcase and set a thin folder on the table. "The audit team contacted us this morning," he said. "I asked legal to prepare everything they'll want. If there's misuse, it gets corrected. If there's fraud—" "You testify," I finished. "I cooperate," he corrected, pride making its last bargain. "I won't let the housing pipeline collapse." "Cooperation doesn't reinforce steel beams," I said. "Money will." He looked at the courtyard, jaw tight, the old ledger of transactions flickering across his face as if he could budget his way to absolution. "I've liquidated some holdings," he said finally. "Anonymous fund. It can be routed to finish the builds. No plaques." I squinted. "Since when do you do anything without your name on it?" He winced. "Since last night." He met my gaze. "Since watching men who can't stand try to stand for you." Pride has many disguises. Sometimes humility wears one too. I searched his face for the tell, the sliver of performance that always sneaks into the eyes when a man starts congratulating himself for contrition. I found only fatigue and fear, not of prison or press, but of being seen and found smaller than the story he told the mirror. The moral math cut a new groove in my head. Blow the whistle now, and the story would be clean. The heroine who chooses truth over blood. Except the collapse wouldn't be clean. Vets would lose roofing contracts midwinter. Families would find half-built walls and a press release for shelter. Hold the files a week, shepherd the money to safer hands, then expose the rot. It sounded like cunning. It might be mercy. And mercy, I'd learned in other deserts, sometimes looks like strategy wearing a plain coat. A hand touched my sleeve. The double amputee rolled up and parked at our table without asking. "He's not the first rich man to spill coffee," he said to me, tipping his chin toward my father. "But he's the first one who came back for a second pot." He shifted to face Richard. "We don't need saviors, Rich. We need people who stay." My father nodded, throat working. "I can stay," he said. "Then do," the vet said, as if it were as simple as a door. He rolled on, leaving the sentence to find its weight. My phone buzzed. Captain Sloan. "HUD audit asks for your statement by KOB. Want me to push?" I stared at the message until the words stopped looking like language and started looking like levers. Then another buzz. Unknown number, media domain. Request for comment before publication. A link followed, innocuous as a snake in grass. I tapped. A video loaded. My father at a donor brunch from 2 years ago. Outdoor tent, white tablecloths, the beautiful boredom of money at noon. He laughed, lifted his glass, and said into the soft safety of his peers, "At least the army pays her rent." The clip ended before context could beg for mercy. The subject line called it a damning remark. The email asked whether I wished to clarify my relationship to Hayes development and speak to the culture of contempt within donor circles. I watched the clip again with the sound off. His mouth formed the words as if they'd been borrowed. The laugh wasn't his. It was a laugh designed to fit in at a table where derision passes as wit. I felt anger rise, heatless and efficient, then hit the ceiling of a discipline I'd spent 20 years learning. Never act on a fragment. The world is full of these, cuts designed to sever the tendon just when a hand reaches for the right thing. I placed the phone face down. "They have you on tape," I said. He closed his eyes like a man bracing for impact. "The brunch," he said. "I remember the joke. I didn't make it first." He swallowed. I repeated it. "Which is worse," I said, not because it was true in a court, but because it was true in a kitchen. He nodded, shame plain. I know. I watched him, watched the room, watch us, without looking. Staff moving, vets arguing amiably with the news, a television over the vending machines chattering about a game no one in here cared about. I heard my mother's old sentence in my ear. He doesn't understand people who serve for reasons he can't count, and wondered if understanding, like rank, is something you have to earn in public. Sloan pinged again. Audit will go public soon. Media sniffing harder. He followed with a second line. Ma'am, if the pipeline collapses, contracts stop tomorrow. Weather's turning. I stood. Walk with me, I told my father. We went to the courtyard and the flag that never pretends. Cold air paired language to essentials. Here's what happens, I said. You sign a sworn statement for the auditors today. You authorize immediate independent oversight for every open build. You transfer funds quietly so projects finish. Then you hold a press conference and say what you did wrong. No packaging, no lighting, just verbs. He looked stricken and oddly relieved. And Ethan? If he signed, he answers. He's my son. So am I said, but I learned to salute the truth first. He nodded, and the nod had the weight of a hinge that has finally accepted oil. I'll do it. Good, I said, because I won't carry this. I tapped the folder. Not for you, not for anyone. We went back inside. He returned to the coffee pot without prompting. I sent Sloan a single line. Hold the statement 4 hours. Mercy wears deadlines. Justice hates surprises less when they arrive with instructions. On my way out, the nurse with the day-old bun handed me a styrofoam cup and a smile that had seen too much to be fooled. He coming back tomorrow? She asked, chin tilting toward my father. That's the plan, I said. She snorted. Plans are for people who don't know better. We like habits. Outside, my phone buzzed a third time. The reporter again. Publishing at 6 p.m., unless you wish to comment. I typed, then deleted, then typed the only sentence that wouldn't indict the wrong people. Honor is a practice, not a press release. My comment will be actions you can verify by morning. I hit send and watched the blue bar climb like a breath held to the end. The wind cut clean across my face. The flag snapped once. Sharp, corrective. Somewhere behind me, a man who had built houses began, at last, to learn how to build a room he didn't need to own. The email went out at 6 p.m. on schedule. By 6:07, the world had opinions. News feeds filled with the clip. 3 seconds of laughter, one sentence torn from context, a caption thick with certainty. Developer mocks soldier daughter at charity event. My phone lit like a switchboard, every alert vibrating against my desk until it became one long hum. I turned it face down and kept writing my report for command. Paper before panic. At 6:20, Captain Sloan stuck his head through the door. They ran it. Every network. Commentary panel in 30 minutes. He set his coffee on my desk, the silent offering of a man who's seen explosions before. You okay, ma'am? I've been worse, I said. Just not on television. He hesitated. The auditors confirmed misuse. Funds were funneled through RHDG subsidiaries. Authorization stamp matches your father's, but they're testing for duplication. And Ethan? Off the grid. Lawyers say he's traveling. Of course he was. Ethan had always known when to leave the room before the truth arrived. He'd learned that art from our father. Now both men were waiting for opposite kinds of silence. I sent Sloan home. Then I sat in the dark office watching the reflection of the Potomac shimmer through the glass. My father's face floated in that reflection, split between river light and screen glow. The smile from the gala photo, now repurposed by strangers into a symbol of hypocrisy. It was brutal and lazy, the way public outrage always is. But it was also earned. He had said those words. He had laughed. Even if context existed, context rarely trends. At 7 p.m., my mother called. Have you seen it? Her voice trembled. Yes. He hasn't spoken all evening. He just keeps replaying it. Tell him to stop. He thinks you released it. I closed my eyes. Of course he does. I told him you wouldn't. Then you're one step ahead of him. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, I think he's going to the VA tonight. Alone? Yes. He said something about finishing what he started. My stomach tightened. Remorse can look a lot like surrender when it runs out of vocabulary. I'll meet him, I said. Stay home, Mom. The drive took 20 minutes. Rain had started again, finer now, like static. By the time I reached the hospital, the lobby was nearly empty. He sat in the corridor outside the rec room, coat folded across his knees, a paper cup cooling beside him. When he saw me, his eyes flickered between relief and disbelief, as if he hadn't expected forgiveness to arrive wearing boots. I didn't release it, I said before he could ask. I know. His voice was rough. Ethan did. Our lawyer found the metadata. He sold it to a blog 2 days before the audit notice. Insurance, he nodded. Against exposure, against me. And you were the perfect headline, I said. I built him that headline, he answered quietly. That's on me. We sat there, father and daughter, soldiers of different campaigns. He stared at the linoleum, tracing the pattern with his thumb. I'm giving a statement tomorrow, he said. Full cooperation. No attorneys watering it down. They'll tear me apart, but the projects will survive. I looked at him, really looked. His posture was that of a man no longer rehearsing authority. For once, nothing in him demanded to win. Then say it all, I told him. Don't explain. Don't soften. Truth doesn't need spin. He smiled faintly. You sound like Command. No, I said. Command still believes spin can save morale. I've seen the opposite. Inside the rec room, the television looped the same footage. A nurse reached for the remote, but a vet near the window shook his head. Leave it. Man's watching himself learn humility. My father heard it. He didn't flinch. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was exhaustion. He turned to me. You should hate me. I tried, didn't take. Why not? Because hate keeps you enlisted in a war after it's over, he laughed softly. Leave it to you to make peace sound like strategy. We walked the hallway once more. He greeted people by name, poured coffee for a man who'd lost his hands, but not his humor. Every pour was penance in motion. When we reached the exit, he stopped under the flickering fluorescent light and said, I'm going to tell them everything tomorrow, and afterward, I'll start coming here every week, if they'll have me. They will, I said. They forgive faster than they should. And you? I'm slower, but steady. He nodded. Then, almost to himself, I finally understand that line from your speech. Showing up when others step back. I stepped back for 20 years. Then step forward now, I said. It's still open ground. The next morning, I stood at the back of the press room as he faced the cameras. No handlers, no notes, just a folded paper in his hand. He looked smaller than the banner behind him and stronger than I'd ever seen. My name is Richard Hayes, he began. For years, I spoke about service as if it were a public relation tool. It is not. It is sacrifice, and I misuse the trust of people who embody it. Every dollar, misdirected from Patriot Builders, will be repaid to the projects it was meant for. I am not here to defend myself, but to begin repairing what I broke. He paused, looked straight into the lights, and added, My daughter taught me that honor is earned in the quiet. Consider this my first quiet act. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until applause broke somewhere in the back of the room. Reporters scribbled. Cameras flashed. For once, his words didn't sound like architecture. They sounded like work. That evening, I drove to Arlington to clear my head. The rows of white markers caught the sun like teeth in a smile too solemn for irony. I walked until I found Collins's name, still fresh on the stone. I set my hand on the cool surface. Another mission complete, Private, I whispered, paperwork and all. The wind shifted and brought the sound of the city beyond the walls, sirens, traffic, life refusing to pause. Maybe that's what redemption really is, life continuing in spite of our ruins. When I got home, a small envelope waited in my mailbox. No return address, my name written in his unmistakable hand. Inside was the missing half of the letter I'd found weeks ago, creased from pocket wear. The ink had bled a little from rain, but the words were clear. Between building houses and building people, yours lasts longer. I read it twice, then folded it back along the old crease. Forgiveness doesn't announce itself, it just stops needing to argue. The next morning, Command forwarded a note from the audit team. Funds secured, projects continuing, no further military involvement required. Below that, a personal line from Sloan. Bridge held, firebreak worked. I closed the message and looked out the window at the river. Sunlight on water, clean and temporary. For the first time in years, I let myself believe temporary could still be enough. Tomorrow I'd speak to cadets about leadership. Again, the kind that endures after noise dies. I'd tell them that sometimes the most difficult orders are the ones you give yourself. Hold the line, forgive the enemy after they stop fighting, and remember to build people, not just empires. That night I slept without dreams. No battlefields, no ballrooms, just quiet. And in that quiet, for the first time since Fairfax, I knew the war was truly over. Winter came early to Virginia that year. The first frost arrived before the leaves were done falling, and the lawn outside my window gleamed silver beneath a sky the color of pewter. I woke before dawn, the way old habits prefer, and brewed coffee strong enough to taste like resolve. The world was quiet except for the hum of the base generator and the flag outside, lifting once, then twice, against the wind. When the phone rang, I already knew. My mother's voice was steady in the way practiced grief is steady. He passed in his sleep, she said. Peaceful. I closed my eyes. The word peaceful felt like a medal he hadn't believed he deserved. I'll make arrangements, I said. He already did, she whispered. He left instructions. Simple service. No cameras. That, more than anything, undid me. The funeral was small. Just family, a few veterans from the VA, and the echo of things we'd finally managed to say. The sky was sharp blue, brittle with cold. The honor guard moved with that flawless precision that turns motion into prayer. My breath made white ribbons in the air as they folded the flag over the casket. Crease, pull, tuck, turn. Each gesture exact, each silence earned. When the chaplain finished, I stepped forward. My boots sank half an inch into frozen earth. The world narrowed to the flag, the wind, and the hollow quiet inside my ribs. I raised my hand and saluted, not for rank, not for ceremony, for completion. A gust caught the edge of the cloth, snapping it once against the air like punctuation. Somewhere behind me, my mother sobbed softly. When the soldier placed the folded triangle into her arms and whispered, "On behalf of a grateful nation," she nodded, understanding that gratitude comes late but still matters. I waited until the others drifted away. Ethan, silent and gray-faced, the vets leaning on canes and each other, then stayed alone with the cold. The marble headstones stretched like an army at rest, their symmetry almost unbearable. For the first time since I was 18, I let tears fall without apology. Not grief exactly, more like release. Back home, I found a small box waiting on my doorstep, postmarked 3 days before he died. Inside lay a key, a folded note, and a deed transfer for a modest building near the hospital. The note read, "For the next foundation, no shareholders, only tenants who served. Consider it my final project, supervised by the only Hayes who ever understood service." I stared at the signature. The handwriting was thin, uneven, the lines of a man learning humility too late but still learning. That night, I walked through the snow to the site. It was a narrow brick building, windows boarded, sign faded. But the bones were good, a perfect place to begin again. I stood in the doorway, breath fogging the cold, and whispered, "All right, Dad, we'll finish it." Within months, the renovation began. No press releases, no ribbon cutting, just work. Veterans from the hospital volunteered, painters, carpenters, electricians who knew how to build things that last. My own unit pitched in off-duty hours. We turned the old office into dorm-style apartments and classrooms. A simple brass plaque beside the door would read, "The Collins Leadership Program." For those who build people, not just structures. The funding came quietly. Some from the liquidation he'd ordered, some from an anonymous donation that arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, unsigned, but the check carried my mother's handwriting. Bridges, it seemed, could be rebuilt from both ends. On opening day, sunlight hit the front steps just right, warming the flagpole to gold. The same reporter who'd once chased scandal sent a short message. "I visited the site. Looks like real service. No story this time, just respect." That was the best headline of my life. Months later, I was invited to speak at West Point again. The auditorium smelled of fresh paint and polished wood, cadets sitting straight-backed and expectant. I told them about leadership, the kind that endures after applause fades. "It's not about commanding," I said. "It's about carrying. Carrying truth when it's heavy, carrying others when they falter, carrying yourself when there's no one left to applaud." A hand went up in the front row. "Ma'am, what do you do when people stop believing in you?" I smiled. You outlast them. And when you finally face them again, make sure you don't see anger, see understanding. Because that's when you've really won. Afterward, a young cadet approached me with tears she was trying not to show. My father doesn't talk to me, she said quietly. He says the army isn't for women. Then show him what it is, I said. Show him what you become when the noise fades. She nodded, fierce and trembling. I watched her walk away and realized I'd just met the next version of myself, the one who wouldn't need war to understand peace. Spring arrived late, but generous. Cherry trees spilled petals across the base courtyard like confetti that forgot it was meant for celebration. My mother visited one afternoon, hands full of photographs. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years. He called that building his redemption, she said, handing me a picture of the finished hallway. He said you'd know what to do next. I already do, I told her. Keep it open. We stood outside, watching cadets jog past the flag. The wind lifted it once, steady, proud, familiar. My mother slipped her arm through mine. He was proud of you, you know, she whispered. He just needed to learn the language. He learned enough, I said. That night, I drove back to Arlington. The city glowed in the distance, lights flickering like Morse code from a world still learning how to speak truth. At his grave, I placed a small plaque I'd brought from the program's dedication ceremony. The engraving read, Richard Hayes, builder, volunteer, learner. Honor isn't inherited, it's chosen every day. I traced the words with a gloved hand, then set a single silver star from my spare uniform beside the stone, not as tribute, as balance. The wind rose, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of cold grass and possibility. I looked across the rows of markers and thought of every name that had shaped me. Collins, Martinez, Hayes. Lives that had taught me different definitions of courage. The flag overhead cracked once, twice, then settled into its steady rhythm. I whispered, finally is good enough. And for the first time, it truly was. When I left, dawn was just beginning. Light bled across the horizon like the slow promise of something healed. Behind me, the flag caught the sun, igniting crimson and white, the blue field alive with motion. I didn't salute this time. I didn't need to. I simply walked toward the open road, the world widening ahead, and the sound of that flag, sharp, faithful, unending, escorting me home.